Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High-Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Tim Ash. Tim Ash is an international keynote speaker on the topic of evolutionary psychology and digital marketing and how those two worlds collide for greater impact, which is really kind of interesting. He's also a best-selling author of a book around landing page optimization, and he's got a new book coming out, which is the thing that's really piqued my interest, which is called Unleash Your Primal Brain. And that's what we're going to talk about. And he's holding it up there for those that are watching on the video podcast. Unleash Your Primal Brain. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today. But regular listeners to the show, I can't help myself with my unending curiosity. So who knows what else we might talk about. We might even dig into some of that digital marketing stuff. But of course, we'll be looking for an angle that's related to how we can put what Tim has discovered through his research into a leadership context. So without any further ado, Tim, please do say hello to our audience and give us a little bit more of your background and what led you to be with us today.
Hey, Mick, it's great to be with you. So if we start at the beginning, I was born in the former Soviet Union, not a very popular place to be from these days. I was born in Moscow, Russia. And my family emigrated to the United States when I was 8 years old and my younger brother was 5. And after studying at the University of California, San Diego, I also tried to get my graduate degree there, a PhD in computer science and neural networks, artificial intelligence. I quit after 7 years to start my first business. And I ran the digital marketing agency for the next 25 years. We were focused on making websites and digital experiences more effective and created a documented $1.2 billion in value for the Siemens, Expedias, Googles, Nestle's of the world on down to much smaller, more nimble companies. And then about 3 years ago, I actually sold my share of the agency and decided to focus on keynote speaking, which I'd been doing over many years. I speak all over the world at conferences and leadership events, as well as you mentioned, writing my new book, publishing a new LinkedIn learning class, and doing some executive marketing advisory consulting for mid-sized company leaders or leaders of mid-sized divisions within larger companies. So I guess that brings us current.
All right, cool. I will dig into some of this digital marketing stuff first, and just a short exploratory, and then we'll get on to the new book and where we can take leadership lessons from that. The one thing that I can definitely say for sure that's common between leadership and marketing is you're trying to inspire someone into some kind of action, whether it's supporting a cause that you're marketing, buying a product that you're marketing, buying a service that you're marketing. You're trying to inspire someone into action. And that's what we do with leadership as well. So what parallels do you see there between marketing and leadership?
Well, I would say don't see the parallels. I see the root origins of both of them being grounded in evolutionary psychology. You're absolutely right. If you want to move people to action, one context of that is marketing, get me to buy something or be interested in something. In leadership, you might want to rally me around a cause or have a commitment around a project or mission or something like that. Both of those involve persuasion, and how to persuade people at its root is understanding how the brain works. And the most powerful perspective I've seen on that is how the brain evolved. It didn't just appear in a vacuum. It evolved for a reason. So to me, if you take marketing and leadership back to the level of persuasion, they have a common root.
Yeah, that's where I thought we would go with that. The one that I'm getting my head around here on the digital marketing side and is that we know that people buy from people or brands that they know, like, and trust. And that we know that that trust, a lot of it can come from human connection. But in the digital marketing world, it's arm's length removed. How do you build know, like, and trust in a digital world?
That's a great question. Normally, you'd establish it by two-way communication, interacting with each other over some extended period of time. But in the digital world, you really don't know much about your visitors. I mean, you may know what browser they're using or what IP address they came from, all this technical stuff, but you don't know what they had for breakfast that morning, what their values are, and so on. So you can only control your side of the equation. And building online trust involves things like your appearance, how professional you look, or who you're appealing to. Outside trust credibility indicators like other people say we're great, media mentions, and so on. Sometimes it's transactional safety, like safe shopping seals and guarantees and things like that in an e-commerce context. And very importantly, it's often what I'd call social proof, or what Robert Cialdini calls social proof. If a lot of people did something and they had a good outcome with it, that lowers my risk of having a bad experience with you. So lots of people have done this. We're the number one choice. We're the best selling version of whatever. That's all indicating that with some kind of badging on your website can also be very powerful. So I call that the 4 pillars of building trust online: appearance, transactional trust, third-party testimonials, and social proof.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So there's a common thread in all of that, and this might come up when we talk about the primal brain. The common thread that I'm hearing is actually safety first. So someone wants to feel safe that they're doing a transaction with you, either through that third-party trust, through that social proof, through the guarantee that you're giving, money back guarantee, whatever the conditions are. So how much does it begin with safety?
Well, safety is our primary concern. If you look at it on an evolutionary level, anything that was a threat to our survival is a problem. In fact, we'll talk about the fact that we're specially tuned to threats in the environment as opposed to upside. So that safety is our number one concern. If we can't manage to stay alive, it's a problem. So anything that threatens our safety, we're on high alert for in the environment, whether that's rapid motion, whether that's hunger signals, whether it's some other kind of variability or unpredictably in the environment. We're always going to try to map some kind of pattern onto it to understand it and therefore feel more safe as a result.
Yeah, good. Okay. All right. And then beyond that safety, then I think the next thing that kicks in would be emotion. So we pretty much know without any doubt now that people make decisions emotionally and they justify them rationally. What does emotion look like in a digital marketing campaign?
Well, let's go back to pretty much no. It's 100% certain that you cannot make a decision without an emotional component, whether that's due to an automatic instinct or some learned behavior from your past. You literally are paralyzed. The conscious part of the brain can present you with options. The decision, the prioritization is made on the basis of whatever the strongest emotions are. So the way the brain basically works is it's a very energy intensive system. It's on standby. The default action or inaction for most things is do nothing. That means it's not important enough for me to do anything about it. The only way you can move me off of that comfortable spot is by fear or gain. So aversion or some kind of moving towards something that I think is going to be positive. So without an emotion, you can't move me to action, period. Full stop, mic drop, whatever they say these days.
That's good. Right? Yeah. So I like the two things that you said there. One is the fear, the aversion, the safety. The other one would be a desired state. So I see myself in a different way if I buy this product, right? So
yes.
So yeah.
And so one of the worst written sales books I've ever read, but the one that's closest aligned to evolutionary psychology principles is by Neil Rackham. It's called Spin Selling. I don't know if you've ever run around. And then SPIN is an acronym, and situation, problem, implication, need, payoff. That's what SPIN stands for. And the basic idea is you gather some facts, you dig at suspected problems, then you rub salt into the wound. What are the full implications of you staying on your current path? And then you bring them back out into the light of heaven and say, what would life be like if all these problems went away? So what you've done is you've taken them on a really fast roller coaster down into the bowels of hell and then back up into the light. And that distance, that vertical distance between the path they're on now and life in heaven is the value that they place on your solution and how motivated they are to change their course. In other words, there's that workout motto, you've probably heard it, no pain, no gain. Well, the same is true in persuasion. Unless you can create a pain in me, I don't value making that pain go away. So you're not going to gain from fixing it.
Yeah, so there's a few things that are emerging for me, Tim, I want to test with you. The first one is that heaven and hell. Being able to understand what heaven looks like for that person, understand what hell looks like for that person, and be able to speak in their language to talk to their emotion about those feelings. Then I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing that the fear of not acting needs to be stronger than the fear of acting, right? So
to overcome the inertia of doing nothing, again, to conserve energy and just stay on the current path. We assume there's a sunk cost, that there's no effort to staying on the current path. But if you say, hey, the current path is your plane is going down at 1,000 meters per second and you're only 10,000 meters in the air. So in 10 seconds, you're going to die.
Yeah.
So you really paint what's the ultimate outcome of this path.
So getting over that hurdle of the fear of not doing anything to get them into action, and that the fear of whatever the worst thing that could happen if you did act is better than the worst thing that could happen if you didn't act. And then that the benefit far outweighs any kind of fear that you might have. So the perceived
it's benefit. A contrast. The way to think about it is, imagine you're going along in a car and you hit a pothole. The first thing that happens is the car goes down, it bottoms out, and then it bounces back up. And then after some transience, it settles into a normal state again. So the size of that shock, how hard did you hit that pothole? From the bottom of the transmission to the topping, suspension to the topping of the suspension, that's the, whoa, I better be paying attention factor.
All right.
And so you can't just use one or the other. Fear is definitely stronger than upside motivation. We can talk about that separately. But I hear a lot of companies and leaders, they're only painting these rosy pictures like, this is our mission. We're doing great new stuff for the world. We're better than sliced bread and everybody should come on this crusade. But upside motivation by itself is definitely not enough. A lot of companies think of that as anything negative as being off brand for them. Well, they're fighting behind both hands tied behind their back as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's interesting because we do know that it's like twice as much. The impact of the fear of loss is twice as impactful as the opportunity that you gain.
Exactly. And we have that encoded even in very long-standing phrases like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It's pretty much accurate psychologically. It's about 2.5 to 1 opportunity versus loss aversion.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. So that helps me a lot with your background on the marketing and digital marketing side, which is going to help us then get to what inspired you to write the book, Unleash Your Primal Brain.
That's a great question. I really came full circle. So when I was at university, I was studying cognitive science and computer engineering. And as I mentioned, I stuck around for 7 years of graduate school and neural networks, artificial intelligence before I quit and started my first business. So the best way to think about it is I've come full circle. I was interested in the brain and cognition. I applied it to marketing for a couple of decades. And then I've come back to my first love, which is explaining how the brain works. In the meantime, there's been this golden age, this flowering of understanding of cognition and the brain. Everything from medical imaging to behavioral economics. There's just all these folks that are rolling back the foreskin of science is kind of how I call it. But all of them are working in their own little individual silos. And so my goal was to have this non-scientific book that pulled together everything with evolutionary psychology at its root as the red thread through the whole story, and basically describe the operating system for all 8 billion human beings on the planet. So by retracing the arc of evolution, we can start with the earliest life on Earth, loss aversion, things like that operate in all animals, and then takes us through addiction, brain chemicals, gender differences, storytelling, our highly social natures, culture. So it takes us to the stuff that makes us uniquely and bizarrely human at the tail end of it. But to understand what persuades us, you have to retrace that whole arc of evolution.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Okay. And I like this because there are people looking at this from all kinds of angles, right? So there are the scientific worlds, the likes of people like Jeff Bloomfield, et cetera, looking at MRIs and going, see, this is the part of the brain that is firing at different times. Then there's the Simon Sinek's of the world that go, look, I've codified what works and what doesn't work from the outcome kind of point of view. So there's the seeing the inputs.
Yeah, the behavior change. People like BJ Fogg at Stanford, who's keynoted at a conference I used to run. He talks about how to change your habits and things like that. And,
cool.
That's really important stuff at an individual level. So I guess you could say my book spans all of that. It's, if you want to look at it through a personal development prism, through a relationship prism, or through being better at business, you can put any set of blinders on and look at it from that perspective. You'll get a lot of really good information out of it.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. So thank you, by the way. I feel honored that I got a pre-release copy of this and was able to sift through it and take some personal lessons as I was reading along the way. So I'd like to go through and unpack some of it. And we'll just pick some of the highlights. We won't go through everything because we want to leave some suspense for your future readers, but let's break down a few of them. We've kind of touched on the first one already. Tell me about the lie of rationality.
Well, that's chapter 1 in my book. There's a long tradition going back to the Greeks, again, of thinking of people as rational. And if we could only tame those wild animals of emotion, we'd all be better off. Or to use the Star Trek analogy, if we were all Mr. Spock. The thing most people don't know unless they're a real Trekkie about Mr. Spock is that the Vulcan race that he was a part of had to wrestle with animalistic, really deep emotions before they could get to that superlogical place. And I think that was still just science fiction. The fact is, we're not rational at all. 95% of what we do is driven by the subconscious, the part we don't understand, the part that doesn't speak in language or use symbols. And that's the part that's in charge. That's the part that handles all emergency situations and the part that has our stored, I guess, history of our body, of our brain, and makes value judgments. The one that essentially chooses is irrational. So as long as we have this rational frame, we're really persuading the wrong part of the brain, the one that literally can't decide.
So this is the stuff that we now know better than ever before, for sure, that people do make decisions emotionally and then they justify them rationally, not the other way around. This is the one that I've been thinking of recently. I'd love your view on this, Tim. Why do we even need that rationality, right? So if we're going to make emotional decisions, why do we think we're rational when we're not?
Okay, well, let me tackle that one. I think that essentially the rational part of our brain is to model and plan through our complex social dynamics. So we also know from research now into brain science that as soon as you're not doing some kind of conscious task, for example, what's 4 + 7, Mick?
Yeah, 11. Yeah.
Okay, it was 11. Okay, so within a fraction of a second, literally, now you're done with that task and your brain frees up, it starts thinking about social information. it starts modeling and predicting the social world. So famous anthropologist Robin Dunbar came up with his famous Dunbar number for each species, basically saying if you have this size brain, you can model this complexity of social relationships. And the Dunbar number for human beings is about 100 to 200. That's how many close ties we can have in our tribe. And so it's kind of like, oh, hey, Mick, if I do a good job for you on this podcast and you know a host of a conference in Singapore, then maybe you'll put in a good word. But, you know, if the guy who runs that conference, his sister doesn't have the same political views as me, you know, it's for all of that. So it's basically modeling our close ties and the changing power dynamics in our tribe, because we evolved to be in small tribes. Yeah. And so all of that brain power is going towards modeling social stuff in weird situations. And I think this is often people on what's called the autistic spectrum that scramble social inputs to their brain. They can free up those extra resources to music, to math, to engineering. So they're really the ones moving science, I guess you could say, and technology forward, but the rest of it are spreading it. We're really good at spreading it, at culture stuff, at tribal cohesion. So it really, our brains are essentially there for very nuanced updating of social dynamics in near real time.
That's really interesting. There's two things that emerge for me there, Tim. The first one I'm confident in. The second one, maybe not as much. Let's see. So the first one was the need for human connectedness, so that our neocortex is helping us process so that we can navigate.
Yes, so the complexity of social situations.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And the example that you gave about, I need to connect to this person, but I know that person's got a certain emotional view and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
or who are their allies, you know, things like that.
So it's helping you navigate. It's not helping you make decisions. It's helping you navigate. The second one that popped into my head as you were talking, to help us make sense of an irrational world, right? So once we accept that the world is not rational and human beings are not rational, we still need to process it somehow. We still need some part of our brain that can identify, name, and manage emotion in some respects.
Well, I don't think we manage emotion. No, emotion just drives us, and it's useful, and it works very quickly. The logical parts of the brain get tired. Your executive function and self-control and conscious attention deplete throughout the day, or after your blood sugar drops because you haven't eaten. There's a famous study of parole judges in Israel. Now, you'd think they were just looking at each case, quote unquote, objectively. It turns out the likelihood of getting parole went way down if they were looking at your case before lunch or at the end of the workday, just based on that, nothing else. So if you said to a judge, you know, you're 4 times as likely to give parole first thing at the beginning of the day after breakfast, they'd say you're crazy. But that's the science of it. So the executive function gets depleted, but the irrational part, the primal part of the brain, as I call it, works 24/7 without ever getting tired. It's taking in literally millions of bits of information per second, filtering most of it out, not even remembering it. It's not even processing it. It's dismissing it as irrelevant, and gives you snap judgments that are actionable all the time, because it's better to be quick. Otherwise, you're dead. I mean, an optimum solution 10 minutes from now when the bear is charging you isn't going to help you.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And then we went back to safety first and then emotion second, right? So that's interesting. I'll give one more example, and I'll see what I'm trying to explore here is why we do this. I know we do it, but why do we do this, right? I'm going to use a good friend of mine. He's going to get sick of me using this example. I won't use it by name. But I've got a good friend of mine that would swear black and blue that he makes rational decisions all the time. He uses spreadsheets for everything, right? So if he's buying a new car, he will use a spreadsheet and he'll do all that kind of stuff. And I'm watching from the outside very observantly and seeing an emotional decision that he then justifies rationally. So let's say that we are buying a car. Let's use that example. I recently did buy a car for the first time in 13 years, by the way, because I just needed one, and I haven't needed one for a long time. I made an emotional decision. I can see that. But when I turn around and tell people, I say, well, it's got ABS brakes. It gets good gas mileage. When I tell my friends why I bought that car, I don't tell them I bought that one because I like the look of it, I like the way it made me feel, blah blah blah. I tell them the facts and figures.
Or you got along with the salesperson who sold it to you.
That helped as well. He was great, right? So why do I turn around and tell my friends all the facts and figures when I actually even know that I made an emotional decision? Why do we do that?
Well, as you said, it's an alibi. There's a science fiction writer, Robert Heinlein, who said man is not a rational animal. Man is a rationalizing animal. And so we can see this on brain scans. When somebody makes a decision, you see parts of their brain light up. And then when a split second later, they start verbalizing and different parts of the brain light up. So it's just the one hand doesn't know what the other is doing. That's the point of the unconscious, is it's unconscious. There's a great study in consumer behavior where they had a rack of German wines and a rack of French wines next to each other. And the sales would switch between the two racks based on whether they're playing stereotypically German oompa music or French cabaret music in the background. Okay. But when you show up at the counter and you say, why did you buy that French wine? No one would say, well, because there was a French tune in the background. But we're really easy to sway. Casinos have this down to an art. The wins, on the roulette wheel, or rather the slot machine wheel, near misses, like 2 out of 3. Oh, I almost got it. The extra oxygen they pump into the room to keep you alert and playing. I mean, all this stuff, you can very easily manipulate people, but nobody wants to think of themselves as irrational. So we have our cover stories and alibis.
Even the casino example is a good one. No clocks on the wall, all of that disorientation.
No outside light coming in. You don't know what is day or night.
Then you've got things like the Gruen transfer, so the design of supermarkets that increase your
milk's always in the back, isn't it?
Yeah. Wow. Increase your dwell time so that you make more impulsive decisions whilst you're there. Yeah, interesting. All right. So the lie of rationality, and thank you for letting me explore a new element of that. The next one I want to talk about, life without brains. One of the things that does kind of differentiate us from most animals, not all, but we do have brains, but there's many creatures on the planet, many trillions, I don't even know how to count it, of life forms on the planet that don't have brains. Why do we even need a brain in the first place? And tell us about this evolution that you speak of.
Yeah, this is a great question. Well, life on Earth has been around for over 1 billion years. Brains have only been around about half of that time. So we've had plants. Plants don't need a brain. They adapt to their environment. You can say they have intelligent behaviors. If a branch gets knocked off a tree, it covers it with sap, heals the wound, and certain plants open only in sunlight. Pine cones of giant redwood trees here in California where I live will only open after a forest fire because they know that that's when they have a chance to grow and they're not beneath the canopy of other big trees. So pretty smart behaviors, but they're not adapting in real time or anything close to it. Whereas movement requires the brain to react in real time. So insects and animals have brains. So that's the main difference. But even among animals, there's some squid-like creatures that we have record of that clearly evolved the brain and then decided to de-evolve the brain because it's just an expensive energy system and it wasn't worth the trade-off. So there's even evidence for unevolving brains. And humans have, by the way, the most energy-intensive brains of all. Our closest ape cousins use about 8% of their resting metabolism to power their brains. We use about 3 times that much. So that brain better be doing something useful. And again, in our case, it's largely focused on that social modeling we talked about.
And the survival, I guess, like, so first job survival, second job human connectedness and social. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and we've actually made significant adaptations just to be able to power that big brain. We have much weaker muscles. I mean, pound for pound, a chimpanzee is about 1/3 stronger than a human. Don't ever pick a fight with one. We have weaker digestive system. Do you ever think about the fact that we call it a small intestine? Well, because the initial stage of digestion has been weakened, but that was because we were able to pre-cook our food And that's another thing that gives us access to more calories to power a bigger brain, but without the expense of digesting it. So there's kind of this gene culture coevolution that also happened as the brain started to grow. Our new abilities and learned behaviors changed our physiology. It was like an arms race.
Yeah, got it. Okay, interesting. And now I'm really getting a bigger picture of what evolutionary psychology is all about. This is really helpful. I'm enjoying this a lot, Tim. For the audience at home, if you don't enjoy this, I'm having fun. All right.
That makes two of us.
All right, good. Next one really got my attention. Experience wires the brain. Tell us about that.
Say that again. Maybe I'm sorry.
Experience wires the brain.
Yes. So there's a famous neuroscience saying, what fires together wires together. So repeated experiences say, oh, there's a pattern here. There's a pattern here. The famous example of Pavlov's dog, you ring the bell and then they get fed. And so they start salivating when they hear a bell ring, even without the presence of food. So they've come to associate the bell with food. Even though it's just a correlation. There's nothing causal about the bell ringing and food appearing. They're just conditioned to it. So basically, when we're young and our brains are very plastic, especially for human babies, we're helpless for a much longer amount of time than other animals. So we're taking these wild, totally random experiences and saying, oh, there's a pattern in here. And so our brain grows a lot of neurons till about age 5, and then it starts pruning them back. And so what you kind of end up with is a super highway. Things that happen a lot get wired into a highway. And things that don't happen often, it's kind of like going off-road into the jungle with a machete and having to cut a new path through to make your way there. So after a while, we start using the shortcuts, the well-developed, strong associations, the common patterns, and that's what gives structure to our lives and our experiences. And it's harder as an adult, not impossible, but much harder to learn new habits or new behaviors because after the age of 5, that first 5 or very formative time, a lot of things essentially get hardwired and are hard to overcome.
Yeah, I feel like we could have an entire podcast episode just on this, but I want to unpack just a few parts of that. And we'll start with those habits and the habituation and whether this inhibits your ability to unlearn what you think you already know and to learn something new.
Well, the only thing so think about it, our brain is essentially there to predict the world, to make sense of it, to help our survival. So it's got a mental model of the world in it. And what happens is if we predict something's going to happen and we don't get that outcome, there's literally an oh shit circuit that goes off in your head and says, we need to rewire this really quick. So sometimes traumatic experiences like a car crash or something and what preceded it will lead to instant rewiring of your brain, making you a better driver, hopefully for next time. But the things that rewire our brain are our mental model not working. So I expected this, that didn't happen. The difference between those two states is going to flood my brain with dopamine and rewire it. So it's a little closer, more accurate model next time.
Got it. Okay.
So that's extreme events. So those are multisensory with strong emotions, like riding a roller coaster, again, a car crash. And then there's other things we can do through duller repetition, which is habit. Rehearsal, do the scales if you're learning a musical instrument and so on. Do that 10,000 times and you'll pick up the new habit. Which
could be a virtuous habit, or it could be a habit that's holding you back as well.
Yes,
unfortunately,
both. Yeah. So if you really want to change someone's behavior, you want to make it memorable and powerful, and like I said, multisensory and associated with strong emotions.
So a life-changing single event, or a
can also rewire you,
or a building up of habits over time.
Consistent repetition and practice. That's another case of if it fires together, it wires together idea.
Is this also where you see a lot of people dig their heels in? So if they believe something to be true and they're faced with a whole heap of evidence that starts to indicate otherwise, that they get selective in what they hear. They only hear what confirms their already held belief. and they seem to somehow either miss or not listen to the contradictory information that might be available.
Oh, God, you just opened up Pandora's box. So let's go down this path. That has a lot more to do with our culture and our need to be tribal. Humans are individually weaker than other kinds of animals. But again, our advantage is not just the herd. There are other herd animals, all mammals are herd animals, but is actually our cultural transmission. So instead of specializing in each environment we evolved into, like squirrels, there's some flying squirrels that fly between trees. Others hibernate in the desert in a hole during the hot parts of the day. People are physically pretty much the same. I mean, there's pygmies, they're 1.50 m. The Dutch are the world's tallest men at 1.83 m or something, but there's not a lot of physical variation. What we did was place this one giant bet on learning the culture of our surrounding tribe. So, where were you born? I'm guessing Australia. Yeah. So I take an Aborigine in Australia and you put him in the Arctic, he's going to die. You take an Eskimo from the Arctic, you put him in Australia, he's going to die. They don't have the cultural package they need to survive in a different environment. So we've come to rely, our survival advantage is what our immediate tribe passes on to us as culture. And so we're such good team players that we will override our own direct experience just to be a good team player. Anybody that doesn't instantly and accurately and completely parrot their tribe's beliefs and spreads them is throwing sand in the gears. It's let's say you're in the age of Columbus and you climbed up the mast of the ship and you say, I think the world is round. I can see the curvature of the earth over the ocean. You know what we do to you, Nick? We throw you off the frickin' ship. Okay, so because you're a heretic and you didn't spread the belief that the earth is flat and that there are monsters at the edges of the map and dragons and sea serpents. So it's really, really important for us to be good team players. And in fact, there's strong censure and escalating consequences for not doing that. You get ostracized, you get denied economic opportunities, mating opportunities, you might get banished, which is really, really bad for humans. Or we might even kill you if it's bad enough. So conformity in whatever tribe you belong to and however you define that is super important. And like you say, we're very selective because we stop seeing our direct experiences because the benefit we get from the cultural package around us is more powerful than that from a survival standpoint.
There's two things that are jumping to my brain now, Tim, as I hear that. Coming back to, we haven't spoken about this actually, but Glass's choice theory and his 5 needs. So his 5 needs were survival, love and belonging, power, fun, and freedom. That were Glass's view of what human needs are, and the most powerful ones are the first two: survival and love and belonging. And this tribalism that you speak of, what I'm now imagining is that we very quickly worked out that if we wanted to survive, we were better off doing it in little groups. That if we wanted to survive our environment, we needed each other. And then the love and belonging, the want to feel like you belong to something bigger than yourself.
That's close, but I would put a different emphasis on it. So the way that to think about it is that being in a group is too simplistic. Like I said, all mammals congregate in groups, and that's their protection and their safety. And that's why you have a hormone like oxytocin, which is the mother-child bond, or most people think of it as the cuddle hormone. Well, it's not. A mother bear will tear apart anything that comes near her cubs. Okay, so it's like this knife edge that mitigates your aversion or advanced response. Like you take care of your in-group and you fight aggressively against your out-group. So that's true of all mammals. Humans have this third state, which is unknown stranger with unknown intentions. So we don't assume you're an enemy or a friend. And things like drugs like Molly, which is a well-known rave party drug, actually changes that line. So strangers are incorporated into that in-group. So you feel love for everyone at the rave. So that it's more nuanced than just herding together. Actually, the whole evolution of human beings is group on group conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And so it's very important to
see
decide
that.
who's in your group and who's out of your group.
Got it. Is this the birth of bias? Is this where bias starts?
It's the birth of tribalism. And before, your tribe was the, again, 100 to 200 people to whom you probably had some pretty strong genetic relationships. And they also were carriers of your culture. They also grew up in the same environment as you. And so they're passing on that cultural package that helps you to survive. And if you fight against another tribe, it was literally a fight for survival. So not the strongest individual, but the strongest tribe that could transmit their values most effectively is the one that won.
I'd like to convert this into some kind of leadership lesson. Mm-hmm. So if we are tribal by nature, but we're now trying to create a world based on multiculturalism, based on diversity and inclusion, I can see the power of tribalism when you're kind of trying to compete against your competitors in the business world or whatever the case may be. But if we're trying to create a multicultural, inclusive and diverse workforce, what do we do with tribalism then?
Well, I'm going to question your assumption. I'm not saying it's not a social good to have a unified view of the planet and of all people as having equal worth, but that's a cultural idea. It has nothing to do with how we're wired. So I hate to say this, but we're wired for the plains of East Africa 200,000 years ago, and we're still using that brain in a world of complexity and 8 billion beings on the planet. And we still are going to map to tribalism. The question is at what level? So the one thing that humans are different in is we don't just have that genetic association of wandering around with our herd. There are lots of associations. I'm like you, part of the bald-headed thought leader tribe. I'm a Mercedes driver. I'm part of that tribe. I'm also an immigrant to the U.S. And you're also an immigrant. You don't live in Australia right now, right? So we're immigrants. So there are different tribal identities. Some are chosen, some are thrust upon us and involuntary. And I think that I forget the gentleman's name that you mentioned earlier that talked about these different motivations. There are operative goals at any given moment. If I'm hungry, I'm going to pay attention to that level. If there's a mating opportunity, that pretty much overrides everything for sexual beings because that's the highest stakes genetic event in our lives, whether you get to throw your genes into the next generation. But in the same way, if I'm at a Mercedes dealer, I'm a member of the Mercedes driver tribe. If I'm eating sushi, then it's the I love sushi tribe. And so they change based on our operative goal at the moment. We can have multiple layers of tribal associations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And now I can see a world where a leader can make that work for them instead of against them. This ability to have this kind of multifaceted element of tribal. I like this a lot.
Well, and I'll take it. And there has also been some sociology research that says if you look at the sphere of concern of people, there's where some of us are in the gene pool that are more conservative, you could say, and some are more, out there. And that's both of those have value. It's the exploit versus explore. Here's a known thing. I'm going to exploit it fully. Or explore, when maybe there's something better over here. I don't know. Let me go check it out. So both of those tendencies are important in the balance of them. So there's certain personalities that are by nature more likely to exploit local resources and others that want to explore far-reaching ones. So what they found is that psychologically, conservative people have a more localized sphere of concern. So if you look at your individual organism, your nuclear family, your tribe, your church, your town, your state, your nation, right? You keep going out, you have the whole world. Oh, that's a world of human beings. Wait, let's include all living life forms on it. And so the progressives are out at one end of that, with universalist views, and the conservatives have a very local sphere of concern. And so what you find is the same events viewed through a prism like that will produce different outcomes. For example, in the US, there's a lot of, Australia's got this too, a lot of immigration and anti-immigration sentiment. So you have the southern border of the U.S. where children are torn apart from their parents and essentially kept in cages. And now how you look at that depends on your sphere of concern. The conservative people are going to say, well, they don't speak my language. They don't look like me. They don't worship like me. So I don't really have a concern about those people. Whereas universalists, and let's call it liberals or progressives, will say every human life has dignity, and separating children from their parents, keeping them in cages, is in no way ever okay. And so they're looking at the same event and applying different filters to it.
Yeah. Wonderful, vivid examples that you're using there. And clearly I fit into the latter example. I'm very much a universalist and believe that every human being is sacred. Every human being has got their own superpower and deserves to be treated with respect and the like. I also, if I want to go beyond that, I believe in a world of co-creation, that when we come together as a diverse group of people, that we can co-create something that's far greater than the sum of its parts, right? So when we bring all of these different viewpoints, perspectives, experiences together, that we create something that's much larger than just ourselves. But what I'm hearing from you is at times we're fighting against our natural evolution of tribalism to create that.
We naturally snap into tribal affiliations over the smallest, most trivial things. I'll give you an example. I've spoken in Australia on several occasions at conferences and worked with clients there. And a local friend of mine took me from the Gold Coast up to Brisbane, and we watched the Brisbane Lions play Carlton, which was her team going back 3 generations in her family. And she bought me a little Carlton scarf to put around my neck. And all of a sudden I'm cheering for Carlton. I don't know them from Adam.
There we go.
But I'm against Brisbane all of a sudden, right? Yeah. And that's how quickly it happens.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, very good. All right. I want to go into something else that really got my attention in your book. I'm still struggling with this one to understand it. We've spoken about the way the brain fires and wires and fuses together, and you have these kind of experiences that shape the brain. Why is memory so fallible?
So again, I'm going to peel that back and say, why do you expect it not to be? Let's take it back to what's the purpose of memory? And the evolutionary purpose of memory is to help you survive, like a lot of other things. The evolutionary purpose is to help you survive, not to be accurate. I mean, there are people who claim to have photographic memories and so on. I'm not sure what the big advantage of that is. So think of it this way. Again, your brain is having massive amounts of information coming into it at any second. We can't possibly remember it all. For example, the pressure of your butt on the seat right now, the reflections of my sound waves off of your speaker and onto different parts of your body. Proprioception, like the relationship of every joint in space, right? That's why when you're eating a salad, you don't usually put the fork in your forehead, and you know where your arm is relative to your mouth. So all this information, most of it's non-actionable. So it's just being flushed. It's just like nothing to pay attention to here. It's ignored. Never mind memorized. It's just ignored from the get-go. What is memorized are things that create, again, multisensory and strong emotional reactions. So being on a roller coaster, wind's whipping through your hair, people are screaming around you, your stomach is conspiring with your solar plexus to evacuate your lunch. All of this is happening. You're going to remember that, right? Tying your shoes, not so much. Driving your car to work, not so much, because you've done that 1,000 times and it's become routine through habit, and it's now handled by the autopilot. It's not handled by conscious thought. But these vivid, strong memories are the ones that say, whoa, that was unexpected. I better pay attention to that. And that's the stuff, if you sleep on it, and that's a critical step, if you sleep on it, it gets remembered. But then it gets overlaid by subsequent memories. So none of it is accurate, and it fades over time. And eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable in criminal cases. So my question back to you is, why do you expect memory to be accurate?
This is good. This is helping a lot, right? So, and I want to keep on exploring it a little bit further, but the eyewitness testimony was what I was thinking about. People that will swear, I saw it with my own eyes, and that gets weight in a court of law if there's an eyewitness, right?
Yes. And so, for example, there are cases of, I'll show you a video of one car bumping into the back of another. And then the defense lawyer will ask the question two ways, like, what happened when the red car slammed into the yellow one versus what happened when the red car bumped into the yellow one? Even the prompt can bias you towards thinking about what speed the collision happened in.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, so it's very easy to manipulate memories, and the trial lawyers are definitely artists at that.
And then the other part that, so there was the emotional part of it, that you're going to remember something that evoked an emotion with you, and then there was the, is this memory serving me or not? And if it has no purpose, your brain filters it.
Well, if you have a mental model of it, then it gets ignored because it's just reinforcing something you already know. Then it's that event isn't remembered. It's just merged into the concept of all the hundreds of times you have tied your shoes. Yeah. You don't need to remember this particular tying of shoes.
Got it. All right. Now, the last one I want to test on the memory side. This happens a lot. And I want people in the audience to think about times that you've said this, where something emerges for you. It might be someone that's got an amazing quote. They're giving a great speech, and they've got this great quote. They've managed to codify something that you've never thought of before, but somehow you knew it to be true. How does that happen? Is that some kind of suppressed memory? Is that real time? And I'm sure you've had experiences like this before, where someone says something to you, you've never thought about it before, but you instantly know, yeah, I kind of know that, but the way you just said it was cool.
Well, I don't know if it's just memory, but I'd say that the way to think about it, again, is not to think you're some kind of exceptional type of creature that stands qualitatively different from the rest of creation, but you're an animal. And so any response we have is a somatic response. It's embodied. It's a whole body response. The brain is just one organ. We keep stuff in terms of our posture and muscle tension. If you've ever done Rolfing, which is adjusting all the fascia layers of your body, the body keeps score. The body is the sum total of what brought you to this point in your life. And so there's the brain. There's actually your gut, your solar plexus is another brain-like thing, which has a lot of neurons and gives you a lot of instant intuitions. You had a gut feeling. You hear that expression, right? It's an embodied response that's automatically available to you in especially scary or stressful situations. And you should trust it because it actually works pretty reliably.
Yeah, very good.
You don't need a rational explanation. You just need to listen to the body instead of the rational brain trying to override it.
I'm going to come back to something I said before, because I used an example of when I bought a car, and I know I made an emotional decision and then I want to justify it rationally. Let's bring this to the boardroom of your company. You might be presenting to the executive leadership team. You might be presenting to your boss or whatever, where we're trying to get a project approved, a budget approved, or whatever the case may be. The way that we do that mostly is, once again, to go in with facts and figures.
Mm-hmm. And it's always a mistake.
Yeah. Okay. So can you give some
there's Oren Klaff's got a book. I think it's called Negotiate Anything. Maybe I'm getting the title wrong. Oren, Oren Klaff, I believe is his last name. And he talks about the reptilian brain. He has a somewhat simplified model that's not exactly scientifically up to date, but the idea is right, that essentially when you have two different worldviews, you have frames of reference. And when those two frames collide, one is going to overpower and take over the other one. And so what you're talking about is the analyst frame, this cold logic, Mr. Spock, give me the numbers. And so he has ways of neutralizing those frames. That's never the winning frame. That's a frame that can say no but can't say yes. It's a dead force. When you start being analytical, nothing creative or generative or new ever comes out of that. So I think that the right way to look at it is how to persuade groups, group dynamics. For example, it's hard to stand up against unanimity. Okay. So if everybody in the room is doing a behavior and you're the odd man out, you feel really exposed and not part of the group, right? Another thing is that influential people can sway. You see this in focus groups all the time, and definitely in boardrooms. The person with the highest rank wins. So if you're actually smart as a leader, what you do is you speak last. You're not suppressing the diversity of those other voices. You're not suppressing the value of their heterogeneous input. So you always speak last as a leader. Always start with the most junior people and work your way around to the senior ones.
Yeah, very good.
That's a practical tip you can do immediately.
You're going to suppress that innovation. You're going to suppress diversity of thought, and you're also going to rob them of an opportunity for growth because they're not having their own opportunity to explore thought and the like. Because if you speak too early, that's really good advice. I want to come back to what we were talking about before with that presentation, and you're talking about, if you just talk about facts and figures, you're not going to get any decision. You're just going to get them they may say no, but they won't say yes. At the other end of the scale, unless you've got a very specific, unique boss, going into your boss and saying, boss, I know that this is the right course to do. I just feel it. It's a gut feeling. Most bosses are going to say, well, come on, I need more than that. So can I take from this that the strength is being able to understand the emotion, but then articulate the emotion, not just say, I've got a gut feeling, but be able to express it more clearly?
Well, that takes us to storytelling. And again, if you look at persuasion, stories are essentially a mind meld. Again, to use my Mr. Spock analogy from Star Trek, he puts his fingers on someone's skull and then he transfers his own experiences directly into that person, right? Well, that's essentially what you're doing with storytelling. Storytelling from an evolutionary standpoint is there to save you the trouble of having those same direct, painful experiences, investing your time, effort, threat of death, whatever. If I say, hey, I went down that road, Mick, and there's a bear around the bend, don't go down that road, I just did you a big favor. And by transferring that story into your head, you basically know the same as I do about the situation, right? So storytelling is a way to sync up brains. Now, the assumption is that the receiver and the listener and the speaker have the same values, because you can tell the same stories but draw different moral lessons from them, different outcomes. I'll give you a quick example from my book. So let's say I give you this objective reality. You can record this with a video camera. So the matador stands in the center of the arena. The bull charges him. The matador deftly sideswipes and plunges a sword from above and between the shoulder blades of the bull, striking its heart and bringing it to a halt and killing it. Okay. Now that's an objective thing you can record. Now, if I'm talking to someone in Spain about that, who likes bullfighting, here's the morals of the story for them. It's about courage. It's about man versus nature. It's about discipline and excellence and tradition and all of these generally positive things. If I'm telling someone from PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, about this event, they're going to think this is wanton animal torture and murder, and people are subsidizing it. It needs to be stopped immediately. Mm-hmm. So the important thing about storytelling is you have to know your audience.
Yeah, good one.
And you have to very deliberately, as a leader in a company, reinforce things with stories, because they are a backdoor that passes by all that logical spreadsheet crap, and they do work, and you have to repeat them endlessly, and you have to make sure that they're having the right impact, because the values of the people in the organization are priming them for that correct moral, if you will.
Spreadsheets are an interesting one, and I'm feeling the glare of every CFO in the world looking at me as I say this. But the amount of times I've been in a company where you keep on working spreadsheets until here's the word, till it feels right. Right. So yes,
yeah.
you got
Ironic.
it.
The objective stuff has to have a good gut feeling behind it.
All right. Very, very good, Tim. This has been amazing. I'd like to leave one last question before we get into our rapid round, and it'll be a challenging one, but you just take us wherever you want to go with this. We've barely scratched the surface of your book. There is so much in here that intrigued me, and I've just picked my favorite ones that interested me. So anyone, when the book comes out and you want to know more about evolutionary psychology and about the primal brain, please get Tim's book. Get in contact with Tim if you've got deeper questions as well. We've barely scratched the surface. What I'd like to leave the floor to you with, to talk to our leaders. So all of our audience are leaders who are looking to improve their leadership. If you were to give one or two tips from what you know from your research to improve their leadership, where would they start?
Well, and it's not just research. As I mentioned, I ran a digital marketing agency for close to 25 years. So I've been a leader at some scale. I would say that the most important stuff is what we just closed with: culture spread and storytelling. It's about how tight and cohesive your tribe is. It's about the kind of stories you tell and the morals that they have. So your job is to repeat your foundational myths, your origin myth, your hero's journey, the why behind your company over and over. All the operational stuff should fall from that. In other words, if you're transmitting values in the form of stories, they're essentially creating a decision-making hierarchy. I don't know if you've ever been to a Disney park at any point. So guess what the number one value of the Disney parks is?
I'm going to assume it's fun. It's the happiest place on earth.
Yeah, funnest place on earth, all of that stuff, right? No, it's not. Their number one value is guest safety.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes
So if
sense.
I said to you, fun or guest safety, it's guest safety, number one. So basically, values are a hierarchy for decision making, and you know which is more important than the other. And so by telling the right stories, you're essentially creating the values hierarchy for your organization. And the decision making can sort itself out. They're empowered to know, based on the values hierarchy, how to act in a given situation. You can't micromanage everything. I know that many of us as leaders stumble and fall on that one. That's not your job, to micromanage everything. It's to create a values hierarchy by telling stories.
I took three things from that, from what you just said. So there was the why. Be really clear about the vision and why you're doing what you do, to give people purpose and meaning. The values hierarchy. That was really powerful, because now you're empowering them to make decisions in real time based on that values hierarchy. Really powerful. And then the third one was the power of storytelling to get those messages across. That's three really good takeaways for our leaders today, Tim. I really appreciate that. And for me too, by the way, I learn something new every episode. I just love this job. Okay, let's take us to our rapid fire round then. So Tim, these are the questions that we ask all of our guests. What's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
The critical importance of sleep. It's daily life support. I have a whole chapter in the book about all the benefits of sleep. But if you're not getting 7 to 9 hours a day at roughly the same go to bedtime, you're cheating yourself and destroying your life and your relationships and your ability to function.
Did you see the massive look of guilt on my face as you were saying that? I've got a lot of work to do there. I'll stick my hand up on that one. All right, very good. What's your favorite book?
I've really enjoyed Noah Yuval Harari's book, Sapiens. That's probably intellectually the most interesting one I've read in years, although The Dawn of Everything by two Davids is also just a really, really interesting book.
Sapiens has come up a few times. I haven't read it. I'm going to have to get a copy of that and read it. That's come up a few times.
The Dawn of Everything, which examines our cultural structures and the governments and how those form and how we ended up on this runaway train that you're not happy to be on as a progressive, that's going to open your mind to a lot of things as well.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. What's your favorite quote?
I think Ram Dass said, "We're all just walking each other home."
Yeah, okay. Like that a lot. Very good. And finally, I'm sure there's going to be people that are very interested. They're going to want to know when the book comes out for sure, because there's so much amazing content in here. But if people want to know more about you, Tim, and how to get in contact with you for speaking gigs, to know more about evolutionary psychology, to know more about the primal brain, how do they get in contact with you?
Well, let me give you a couple of pointers so that if you're interested in having me speak or do a corporate training or at a conference, or my executive marketing advisory, where I'm essentially on call for a senior leader at a company for all things marketing, unlimited access to me, go to timash.com. And if you're interested in the book itself, by the way, it's available as an audiobook, as an ebook, as well as a paperback. I know you have more listeners in Australia and New Zealand. There's a Booktopia edition for those folks. So go to Booktopia and get it. Everywhere else, just it's on Amazon and all the places you'd expect. I narrate the audiobook, which makes it extra fun. But go to primalbrain.com. And actually, if you go to primalbrain.com/book, you can pull up a chapter of your choice, whichever one you want from the table of contents. And I'll send you that as a PDF. So primalbrain.com/book.
That'll be a hard choice, because I can tell you these chapters, every one of those chapters is interesting. But yeah, that's great, Tim. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I learn something new every episode. That's true. Today, I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose. There's been so much interesting content, and thank you so much for the license that you give me to quench my curiosity by taking the conversation and in my direction and picking the parts that most interested me. I really enjoyed it. I learnt so much. I know the audience would have well. Thank you so much, Tim.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for the opportunity, Mick.
Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've learned together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.